One of the phrases I like to use is there's a reason God says make a joyful noise and not a pretty one. We'd have a bulletin, and maybe you're old enough to remember this, but there would always be like a section for prayer requests.
Right.
And people would they would use them for prayer requests.
Sure.
But they would also use them for complaints. Nobody was more offended or had the right to be more offended than Jesus Christ.
I remember the first time I saw Planning Center, I was like, this is a spaceship compared to...
I don't think people realize how much that changed our life.
Oh, I think the great thing about that is it frees us up to really focus on the pastoral part of what we're called to do.
There are two words in our title, it's either worship pastor or worship leader. And we could do the worship part probably because we've been gifted musically in some way. And we tend to kind of that's how the church kind of views our responsibility. It's the leadership part that I think carries as much weight as standing on the platform.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the RomansTwelveOne podcast. My name is Marty, and this is my dad, Tim Tibbles, Mr. RomansTwelveOne himself.
Yeah, we're in episode 2.
Episode 2.
I'm actually really excited about this. We got a lot of feedback on episode 1.
Yeah.
A lot of people really liked you, which I thought was pretty awesome.
Guys, stop it.
Pretty exciting. So we've got a lot we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
And an interview that I did recently with Brian Tabor from Worship Probs, which I'm super excited about.
Can't wait.
If you listen to the Worship Probs podcast, or if you're on Instagram and you look at he started off as a meme account.
Yeah.
And it just got funny. And then they did a podcast. And
I didn't know what he looked like.
Yeah.
Which was the point.
He's a great dude.
He's awesome.
He's a great dude, so.
He's awesome. Well, I can't wait to listen. We're going to go ahead and just kick this thing off.
Let's go.
Last episode, if you haven't listened, go back and listen. We talked about the Gen 1 worship leader and who that is. And so I want to dive a little bit deeper into, if you can talk to me about the role of the worship pastor.
Okay.
What is the worship pastor? Where do you put emphasis? What is the worship pastor's role?
Okay, that's a great question, because I think last week we talked a little bit about what worship was.
Yeah.
It's offering our bodies as living sacrifices. We talked about the idea that the worship as defined in Scripture started in Genesis 22. It was when Abraham, was taking Isaac to sacrifice him. And it really comes down to loving the one who blesses us more than the blessing itself.
Yeah.
And so the idea of worship really is offering yourself as a living sacrifice, as Paul talks about in Romans 12, which is why we call this RomansTwelveOne podcast. And so understanding what that is, and I think there's a lot that goes into being a worship leader. I think the biggest thing is we have to recognize is that there are really two words to the title.
Yeah.
Whether it's worship leader or worship pastor or worship minister, there's two parts to that title. And the first one is important because it helps us really define what we do. Our job as worship pastors, worship leaders, worship ministers is really to help the church give themselves to the Lord. Now, a lot of us got this job because we were, gifted musically. Mm-hmm. Music is a big part of why we do what we do. And I would say the reason we use music as a primary function of worship as a congregation is because there's not a whole lot we can do in unison or in concert, in congregation together. We can clap. The Bible, in fact, Hebrews, the Hebrew, which would become the Israelites, they actually had 7 different definitions of the word praise, or different words that meant the word praise that we use today. And it's because they were the things that they could do together, And so when we worship, it really is about what we can do together. We can clap together. We can read God's scripture together. We can pray together, but probably the easiest thing to do is sing together.
Sing together, yeah.
And not that many people think they can sing, but there's one of those phrases I like to use is there's a reason God says make a joyful noise and not a pretty one. Yep. I've said that your whole life.
My whole life.
And that's because God doesn't really care what you sound like. He wants to know that you're ready to bless him and to praise him. And so
it's about adoration.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I think of, you and I, if we were to go, say do something together and you're just like, Dad, I want to take you out for Father's Day, bless you, do something awesome for you. You could probably think of 5 things instantly
for sure
that we would do together.
Yeah.
If one of your siblings, your brothers or, your sister wanted to take me and do something, it probably would look different than what you and I would do together.
Very probably. Yeah. Very different.
But I would say what I think is interesting is if all of you got together and decided you were going to do something for me as your dad, it would take all of you giving up yourself in what you really wanted to do in order to bless your father.
I will say, as the oldest daughter, I don't always have to give up myself as much as the rest of them do.
You kind of drive the car.
Well, because I'm like, I can just handle it if y'all just Venmo me $20. And most of the time they're like, sold. Just handle it. But they would be subscribing to whatever I decided was the best gift for you. And they would have to just be okay with that if they're okay with me driving the ship.
And I would say this, as your dad, there may be fewer things that bless me more than when all of you get together and
make a decision,
do something for me,
Yeah.
And so I think we have to look at ourselves as a congregation that way, that we get the opportunity to bring the whole church together, all the kids together.
Yeah, it's good
to bless the Father. And music is just the vehicle to do that. Music is not worship, but is the expression of our worship, to the Lord. And
that's a beautiful way to look at it.
What we want to do is we really want to lead the family in blessing the Father. And we all have to give up ourselves to do it. So it's still the definition of worship.
Right.
But that might look different for different people. For some people that might be, we're doing a little bit different style than what I like, for other people, it might be, maybe the attire that the people on the stage are wearing looks a little different, that kind of stuff. So for every person, that's probably going to look a little bit different than what they would do if they just sat down and worshiped God by themselves.
Right.
But the idea is that we get the whole congregation together and we worship together.
To do something. Yeah.
The second word in our title is, I think, just as significant as the first. And regardless of whether that's leader, minister, pastor, whatever your church calls it, we have an obligation to lead, to minister, to pastor our church and the people in it. And it's a little bit more difficult because we were probably asked to do what we do because we're talented. We can sing, we can play our instrument, whatever. And we have to develop that skill of leadership and pastoring. And there's going to be all sorts of people in the church, people we like, people we don't like, that God's going to put in front of us.
Right.
And one of the traps I think we can fall into is the trap of trying to create a church for ourselves.
Right.
Where we pick the music we like, we preach the sermons we like, we surround ourselves with the people we like, but that's not really pastoring.
Right.
Pastoring is caring for the thing that God puts in front of you, for the people that God put in front of you.
Right.
So you're going to see people at their best. You're going to see them at their worst. And you have to decide, how do I pastor these people in these moments?
Right. And they'll see you at your best. They'll see you at your worst. And they will 100% tell you when you're at your worst.
Yes, they will. They will let you know.
Yep. And you have to pastor them with the same grace and kindness that you would to the person that's praising you.
Yeah, I think, and there's kind of two pieces to that. That if somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, I love your worship today," which I think is the oddest.
It's so awkward as the person on the other side of that.
Yeah.
You don't want to be that person that's like, "Oh, praise the Lord."
Yeah.
Like, praise the Lord, I'm talented.
Yeah, you're not really sure what to say in those moments.
Or it's all about God. Shut up. Like, you don't want to be that person either. So it's like, okay, well, like, what do you say?
Right.
What is your response?
So
tell the people, help us out.
I try to turn it back. So first of all, I realized they probably don't have the language to say what they're actually trying to say. And this is honestly true with whether they're complaining about something being too loud or whether they're giving you a compliment. They don't really have the language to say what they mean to say, which oftentimes means I was really blessed by what I experienced today.
Right.
So they'll come to you and they'll say, "Hey, I really loved your singing," or "I really loved your worship." And what I try to do is turn it back to an us conversation. So if they say to me, "I really loved your worship," or "I really loved your singing today," I'll just turn back and say, "I really loved yours."
It's beautiful.
And they'll well, you couldn't even hear me, whatever. But together we got to bless the Lord together, and that encouraged me. That blessed me today. So I try to really turn it into an us conversation because
that's great.
Again, the goal is to get the family to bless the Father.
Right.
So,
right. That's good.
And it also pastors them in that.
Yeah.
So now if they've got a complaint, it's the same thing. I try to recognize that they probably don't have the language to say, that, 3 hertz on
Right.
that guitar really hurts my ears. And
Right.
so, you know, whatever. So
Sorry.
yeah.
I'm just kidding.
So they, you know, so they say it was just too loud, you know, or why do you have to sing so loud? That kind of stuff. And so just try to pastor them through that moment and say, oh, you know, I'm sorry you had a back. What they're really trying to say is it was not an experience that I enjoyed.
Right.
And so just try to turn them and say, you know, were you able to sing? You know, I'm sorry, you know, for whatever reason that wasn't a great experience for you, and just try to pastor them through that moment. So,
I mean, I had a lady literally walk up to me. I wasn't leading that Sunday. She came up to me and she was like, do y'all have earplugs here? And I was like, we don't. And she's like, some churches do. And like, you just can't help. You just can't help.
Usually that means that they just don't have the language to say what they want to say.
Yeah.
And so I think what we have to do is we have to figure out how to pastor them that they are a child of God,
right,
in need of God.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason,
they can't worship right now.
They were obstructed from the Lord. And we also have a responsibility in that. We can't just assume that because somebody has a complaint that it's not valid.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
no matter how spicy,
we get to pastor them in that moment.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
What can we do to help you connect with God today?
Right.
You know? And help them realize that sometimes it means giving up ourselves.
Right.
So that the benefit of the congregation can worship together. So.
I think that segues us into something that I really want to talk about, because my generation specifically, and I would even say a lot of creatives in general, but really my generation is probably the most offendable group that you would ever come into contact with. I mean, it just breaks me. But I would say, like, I've also been super offendable until I was like taught how not to be.
What?
Well, I just have opinions and mine's right. Just kidding. But I mean, in the sense of, I think we all have to work on being offendable. I think it's hard to like not have your feelings hurt.
Why do you think your generation is the most offendable?
I'm going to sound like a grandma for a second, but genuinely, I think the internet has a lot to do with
that
it.
Fangled internet.
That darn internet. Like, for real though, I think the internet is a big piece of that, because someone, like, you always talk about like people writing in their church bulletin on their like prayer request cards.
Yeah, so that's how it used to happen for
about
us.
Like complaints.
Yeah, so used to we'd have a bulletin, and maybe you're old enough to remember this, but there would always be like a section for prayer requests. Right. And people would they would use them for prayer requests. But they would also use them for complaints. So they would write things in the prayer requests, and
But like, who saw them other than you, you know? Or like the office people, which I can imagine that being like a, haha, let's give this one to Tim. Like, I can just imagine, like, that's funny.
Right.
But I'm living in a generation where someone can literally like create a fake account and put it in the comment section.
Everybody sees it.
And everybody will see it. Or they can harass you. In your DMs, harass your comment section. And so we're just living in an era of like, if you post anything, people think that you have put your face out there to be subject to whatever they want to say, because they're able to hide behind it.
Yeah, and I hate that for you guys, because obviously that's not healthy. So my generation definitely did not have to deal with that.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the main thing that kind of keeps us there, is that like in the era of, I grew up in the like rise of cyberbullying, and I think that just put, and just everybody's opinion can be everywhere all at once, where it couldn't really be before. Like, if you wanted to find out someone's opinion, you'd have to call them, or you'd have to go talk to them, or you'd have to like read someone's opinion in the newspaper, or see it on TV.
They used to call this subtweeting. I don't know what they call it nowadays.
They called it subtweeting when I was in high school too, so I can't help you with this. Unfortunately.
I don't know what they call it.
And they'll be like, at me next time.
Yeah. So like, people will like post things, and it's about your church. But they don't actually name your church, and so
I've been meaning to go on this rant for a while. That's how they always start.
My church doesn't do this, and we get
my church would never.
Yeah. And you know who they're talking about.
Right.
I think you're right. I think part of the reason is because emotions are so easily expressed,
and distributed,
and really unfiltered.
Yeah, because they don't have to be. And it's impossible to read someone's heart when they're like typed out.
When they're hiding behind a keyboard.
Well, it would also be one thing if someone would like come up to me and say like, hey, I'm legitimately worried about this. Can we talk about this? Yeah. Versus someone typing that out on a comment on a public post, hey, I'm legitimately worried about what your church is preaching. Can we talk about this?
Yeah.
That is a completely different story than someone saying it to me in person, because I can't see your heart. Like, I can't read your heart unless I hear your tone of voice, unless all of that. And so, and there is a lot of my generation, it's like, your feelings are valid, your opinion is valid. And while that is true, there has been an excess of validation, I feel like, that's made everyone think that they can say whatever they want and they're allowed to be hurtful.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, well, I didn't mean to hurt their feelings, so it's okay that I did.
Yeah.
Rather than just like an apology. And I think all of those things kind of coupled together, those what I'd say the main things that have made my generation just like the easiest to offend.
Yeah.
And it's hard being in the middle of the generation and trying to like live unoffendable when everyone around you is super offendable.
Right.
Or when you're like genuinely passionate about something, which is where I think a lot of creatives kind of fall into. Like, we're so passionate about what we do. And when you say something about my voice or about the mix or about whatever, like, that's my art. Like, I spent so much time
you almost find your identity in that.
Cultivating
That's a whole nother
my
podcast.
Art for sure. I spent so much time on this mix. Like, they don't know, like, we spent our entire rehearsal trying to perfect the mix, and like, it brought us life because that's our
the drums
art.
are too loud.
And when you say something like that, you're trying to come at my art.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the same, like, creatives can kind of fall into that trap too.
Yeah.
So would you say, it's a very long introduction to what I want to ask, but what would you say if you were like looking at just a group of people from my generation and even the generation below, to say like, these are the pieces I would say are most important to keep yourself living unoffendable so you're able to pastor the people who are offending you?
I think number one, and this is going to sound like such a Sunday school answer, but I think when you think about the implications of this, it's huge. Nobody was more offended or had the right to be more offended than Jesus Christ.
So simple, not small.
It's not small because
it's not small.
I mean, literally, he was crucified.
Yeah.
For what he did. And to the point where like now that's a part of our vernacular, right? Like, oh, if I were to make this decision, they would crucify me.
They would crucify. Don't crucify me for this.
Yes. So Jesus had every right to be offended by the people who crucified him. But when he was on the cross, what did he say? Father, forgive them.
They don't know what they're doing.
They don't know what they're doing.
Wow.
And so I think there's a couple things there that I think we can draw from Jesus. Number one, he knew who they were and he knew who God was, and he knew who they were in light of who the Lord was. And Jesus knew he was fulfilling the promise and the purpose that God had given him. And I think he found stability in that as long as I'm doing the thing the Lord has called me to do, nothing can move me.
Yeah.
Not nails in my hands, not a crown on my head.
Wow.
Nothing can move me from the thing. In fact, scripture tells us that it was the joy of the Lord that was before him that enabled him to endure the cross.
Right.
And so I think we just have to remember that while we can get offended, and I think it's okay to look at like, this really hurt my feelings, or I don't like the way this feels. I think taking it to the stream when we respond the way people have responded to us, I think is where that line begins to be crossed.
Yeah.
So this is gonna sound really silly, but you remember the movie Hook?
Yes. You love that movie.
I love that movie. There's a scene at the end where Robin Williams, who's like grown up Peter Pan, he's got to go save his kids. At the end, he's taken his daughter away, and his daughter looks back at Captain Hook after he's been defeated and said, "You need a mommy really, really bad."
He did.
Yeah.
And
I think what I try to do is realize what Jesus did is he looked at all of God's people and said they need their father.
Oof. Yeah.
And so when somebody's complaining to me about the drums being loud, or they don't like the way I sing, or they don't like the holes in my jeans, or that I wore a hat, or, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I just try to remember that, like, number one, God didn't ask me to hang on a cross.
Thank you for that one.
Yeah.
Shout out God for that one.
And then number two, they are just people in desperate need of their father.
Yeah.
And my job as a pastor is to help them get there.
Yeah.
So
that's good. Well, and even though like you didn't grow up like with like the age of the internet, you kind of saw it come, but you did kind of have to work through like outfit like what was acceptable for outfits changed.
True. That's true.
And so like you did probably have to manage like an older generation above you. Like how dare you not be in a suit and tie?
It still happens. If
I love it.
If I preach at a funeral, if I sing at a funeral and I'm in a suit, there'll always be somebody from the church there. It's like, why don't you wear that on Sunday? Oh, I've never seen you look so good. And
yeah, weird compliment. Weird way to tell me I look good.
Yeah, exactly. So, but again, they probably don't have the language to say what they really want to say,
right?
Or what they mean, and they're just people. And just because their thing's not my thing doesn't mean I don't have things. And
right.
So,
that's good. That's good too.
What I really want is just to figure out how to connect them to the Lord.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be moved because I know what God's called me to do. Now, I haven't always been this way.
Well, yeah.
And I think that's the point of all of this is I really want to help shorten the learning curve for your generation.
Right. That's good. Something you kind of touched on, but I just really want to highlight it is when you were saying like, you kind of touched on it with like identity and like, I thought that was beautiful too. Like, it's just so important to know that you can't worship your art or let your art become your identity more than the person who like gave that to you and who blessed you with that ability and your talent.
Blessing more than the one who blessed us.
Exactly. Yep. And like something like my worship pastors say and our lead pastors say all the time is you can't write on your talent. If you write on your talent, the ministry is going to crush you.
Yeah.
And I would think that would probably, for my generation especially, and just for creatives, that would probably be the thing that would crush us.
Yeah.
Is just that there's a lot of opinions out there.
And we'll probably do a whole podcast on identity of the worship leader, because we definitely can fall into the trap of thinking that the thing God has asked us to do is who we are. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, there's all sorts of, I think, traps that the enemy will use to ensnare us.
He knows,
he does.
Yep. he's smart and crafty. I don't want to give him too much credit because he's a loser, but like he is crafty and he knows where, like what's going to hit us, And I think that is such a piece that I just wanted to highlight, because like we can't let our identity come from our talent, because if it comes from our talent, the second that someone comes for it or comes for something that you're passionate about, it's going to offend you, and that'll break you so quick. Absolutely.
And one of the things I love about Brian Tabor, who we're going to talk to today, is he found some really creative ways to deal with this. He launched a meme account.
Yeah.
What's really funny to me is when he first launched this podcast, he actually disguised his voice. We talk a little bit about that in our interview.
Legendary.
Because there was this feeling of exposure and exposing the church, and he talks a little bit about that. I'll let him kind of share his experience, but now he has this podcast and he talks about prayer concerns, and it's not really prayer concerns. It's really the complaints people write on their prayer cards.
That's so funny.
That kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of people listen to it. And I think, what he's done is great. He's come up with creative ways to process it with other people who understand. And and I think he's kind of been an example to all of us on one of the best ways to deal with those types of things.
That's epic. So, well, let's listen.
Hey, welcome back to the RomansTwelveOne podcast, where we are connecting the Gen 1 worship leader to the next generation. And I'm excited, really excited today. I have one of my favorite podcast hosts, Brian Tabor from the Worship Probs podcast on today. Brian, will you introduce yourself?
Yeah, man, I'm honored to be here. Thanks for having me. So back in 2016, I started a meme account for worship leaders, and it in the beginning, it didn't really do anything, but I was in year 25 of being a worship pastor, and I just needed some therapy. I needed to get some things off my chest. I was anonymous, and it kind of developed a little bit of a following over the years, and podcasts and all that good stuff. And so I am. People kind of refer to me as Mr. Probs because I've got a lot of probs, I guess. A lot of problems.
Well, so what's funny is when I first stumbled on your podcast, I think I was just looking for worship resources, ways to connect, and I found your podcast before I ever realized you were a meme account. So I kind of came in the back door, and as I'm digging through your podcast, I'm noticing there was this difference between Mr. Probs at the beginning, Mr. Probs at the end. And then when I discovered you had a meme account, I felt like, okay, this guy really felt the need to be anonymous there for a while. So
yeah. I was walking through the church one Sunday and an older lady pulled me aside and just chewed me out. And I can't remember why, if it was something we hadn't done or something we did do in the service. And she walked away and I stood there and I just sort of laughed. And I thought, you know, again, I was a couple of decades in at that point, and I thought, I wonder how many people are experiencing this today. I mean, and then I thought, how cool would it be if we had like a community where we could unpack this stuff? You know what I mean? And I didn't immediately jump towards the redemptive part of it. Like, okay, this is what happened. How do we stop that from happening, or how do we lead through that? And so that kind of came later. But yeah, I was anonymous for a really long time. And even when the podcast started, we put this like witness protection filter on my voice. We thought that'd be funny. And so for, I don't know, the first 50 episodes or something, I've got like this FBI protective filter on my voice. And yeah, so it's been a wild ride. Certainly grateful for, we serve a creative God, and never in my wildest dreams did I expect to be making a living at this. I mean, I stepped into this full time on May 1st of 2022, and it has been a really wild ride since then. Lots of fun, lots of learning, lots of challenges. But it is all, it's all just done to serve the community, and, you know, to get to connect with people like you, like-minded, like-hearted people who we care deep. I mean, we've given our lives to serve the local church, you know, and we care deeply about it. We care deeply about the next generation. So our thing has kind of been like, if I can make you laugh a little bit and realize, oh man, I'm not the only one who's dealing with that. Then it kind of sets us up on a equal footing. You know, let's have a conversation about it. So yeah, that's kind of my
favorite, and I'm sure you hear this a lot, but like my favorite part is the prayer concerns. And,
yes.
Part of the reason that resonated with me is I think anybody who grew up in the generation we did, leading worship, there's, you know, we had the, you know, the pamphlets that you pass out at church, the bulletins, and there's always that tear off piece, you know, and somebody has had that experience where in the prayer spot, people would write down their thing. And I used to beg my pastor, please, because at the end of, you know, every week, we would actually publish all the prayer requests on a sheet that people could take home. And I would just beg my pastor, listen, and I'm just going to use, you know, fake names here, but Mary wrote on here in this prayer concern that the band is terrible. I would love it if we would just put in the prayer, you know, the prayer sheet, pray for the band, they're terrible, from Mary, you know, and he would never go for that. But when you started doing that on your podcast, man, I was like, this is a dude that I need to listen to more. So,
well, I mean, what a horrible idea! Like at my first church, I was fresh out of college, and this was a church of like 1,200. They hired me to be an interim because their music pastor left, and so I step into this. I've never directed a choir before. This was a really choir heavy church. I had led worship, but in terms of like pastoring people and organizing teams and bands and all that stuff, I mean, that was all completely foreign to me. And I'm so grateful that their live stream was not a thing in 1993, or there would have been all kinds of material of my own, you know, props and my own feelings. But same deal. Like we had a card that they would put in the seat back in front of them. And
and the little holders, right? That were attached to the pews in front of
those little golf
little pencils.
It was like prayer request or comments. It actually said or comments.
Comments.
And so I would walk in to the office on Monday morning, and the office staff would have compiled all of those and printed them out, and they're in every staff member's mailbox. And I could always tell how brutal the comments were by what they had waiting for me. Like, I was a young guy, and my breakfast typically was like Ritz cheese crackers and a Mountain Dew. And if they had a Mountain Dew waiting for me, I knew the comment cards were brutal from the day before. And so, yeah, I used to ask the pastor all the time, like, why do we just take the word comment off of there? Like, if they're really passionate about it, they will find a way. They're going to they're going to find me or they're going to find you.
The problem is they would have taken the word comment off and you still would have gotten them. You still would have received them. They still would have been on the prayer request. So,
and I used to write this was before email. This was before a lot of that tech that we rely on today. So I would write, I would type responses to people and I would put a stamp on it and put it in the mail and send it to them. I mean, I got some of the most savage, oh my gosh, it was absolutely brutal.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Oh yes. I'll start twitching probably.
Oh man. So I think that's kind of the point of what we're trying to do here, which is kind of, I think we all walk into the thing that we're handed and we don't really know what it looks like before we arrived. We don't know the people that built it, the circumstances that we've received, that thing under, and then we have to steward this thing called the worship ministry that the Lord has given us. And what I really am passionate about right now is our generation, the Gen 1 worship leader, being able to hand off this thing that we've stewarded to the next generation with as much wisdom as we can so that they can then carry it forward. I think there's a lot of decisions we made that were awesome. A lot of decisions we made, like, sending, typed letters to people that we can't take back, that weren't awesome, but it's landed us where we are today. And so, you touched on this for a second ago. Talk a little bit about your first worship ministry. Like, what was that like? What year was that? How long have you been doing this? I'd love to kind of unpack how long you've been doing this and where you're at now.
So I started so I've lived in Indianapolis my entire ministry. I graduated from Anderson University in Anderson, Indiana, moved right to Indianapolis for the church that I mentioned earlier. And so I'm the weirdo who's never moved for a church position. I've served 3 churches and they're all in Indianapolis.
Oh, wow.
And so that first one, their worship guy left, and he's a guy named Danny Daniels who wrote the song "I've Just Seen Jesus."
Oh, whoa!
Sandy and Larnell, and so
I was gonna say. So not only are you living in Sandy Patty's backyard, exactly, you end up working with or replacing the guy who wrote one of her most famous songs. Yeah,
exactly. And he was super talented. He was an incredible pianist, a great singer. He would orchestrate stuff, on his own. Like, guys, this was before you could get online and download string parts for your favorite worship song. Like, you had to either write them yourself or hire somebody to write them. Like, I can remember the first chart I ever had to the song "Shout to the Lord" was handwritten by me.
Wow.
Just at the keyboard, and I didn't have finale or anything. Like, these are handwritten, scored. And I wrote we had a horn section. We had two sometimes 2 trumpets and a trombone, sometimes trumpet, sax, trombone. And
you're basically Chicago as a worship team.
Exactly. And I would write the charts out like that. Like, it was a completely different world. Like, this was pre-planning center. This was pre-email. Like,
this is back in the binder and paper protectors day.
Absolutely.
That was a whole era.
And you would collect those at the end of the week and file them in a giant metal file cabinet, so you didn't, violate the CCLI rules. Right. And you're doing and so there was this resource called Songs for Praise and Worship, and they would have these binders you could buy, like a violin book. Like, they had a book that was all the songs they had, and they would have like volume 1, volume 2, and you'd have to buy a giant binder of violin music or trumpet music or whatever you had, piano, score. If you had people who weren't going to read a lead sheet or whatever, like back then.
Dude, you're bringing back memories right now.
Oh my gosh.
I had a shelf full, and they matched the hymnal in the back of the chair.
Yes. And you had to find like a giant room to store all these binders in.
Yep. And when they started doing the newer worship songs, it was an exciting day because at first it was just the hymnal songs, the songs of praise and worship, which were just really hymns. But yeah, then they came out volume 2, 3, 4, and you're like, oh my goodness, they're finally doing shouts of the Lord. Yeah.
Right. I can throw away this horrible handwritten chart that I made for the song.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was like, I would make an Excel spreadsheet. I went to visit a worship pastor who was much further along than me. And he was like, okay, how do you do your schedule? I was like, well, I make an Excel spreadsheet and I send it out to everybody. He was like, you send the whole schedule to everybody? You need to stop doing that. And I was like, why is that? And he goes, well, you've got, Mary, who's going to count up how many times she's on the schedule versus, Jill and how many times she's on the schedule. And so I come back and I sit down with my administrative assistant. And I'm like, okay, we're going to change this up a little bit, but think about, so like I'm making an Excel spreadsheet, like for 3 months of services. And then I hand it to the admin. I write a letter. She has to pull out, Mary's schedule and Jill's schedule and Bob's schedule, all that. And like it was like a 2 to 3 week process to just get people scheduled. You would mail that all out. Maybe we had a postage paid response card in there saying, yeah, I can do my dates, or no, I can't. And, and I remember the first time I saw Planning Center, I was like, this is a spaceship compared to.
I don't think people realize how much that changed our life.
Oh,
like,
my word.
It completely, I would say Planning Center saved my, for lack of a better term, career as a worship pastor.
Absolutely.
Because
like I always tell young people, if you think about how the iPhone has revolutionized communication, that is the Planning Center is the equivalent to that in the church world. And now, beyond worship and all that stuff. But man, back in the day, it was like, again, no voicemail, no email. Our church didn't have a website. We didn't project lyrics. You mentioned bulletins. We printed lyrics in the bulletin.
So you guys never did like the overhead projector lyrics? Did you guys ever do that? Or was that just for youth services?
We did that growing up. We did. And I grew up in an Assembly of God church. So the lyric person got a workout, man. Like it was just totally spontaneous. They would go diving into this like accordion file of transparencies or be flying everywhere, Oh man. Yeah. So we did that growing up. My brother was the worship pastor at the church I grew up in. And he was 19 years older than me. So there's 5 of us. He's the oldest, I'm the youngest. And so I grew up kind of cutting my teeth under him, and, whoever didn't show, that's kind of what I did. I played a little piano back then, and he would, he would play the organ, and he would flash numbers at me from the organ. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. And finally, I get down and figure out what that means. Yeah. I mean, it was people who are just starting today would laugh and cry and probably do all kinds of stuff if they saw how, and I'm older than you are, but how we were doing it back in the day, man. It was.
I really feel like we've built something, so I grew up Church of Christ. So I had to make the leap from non-instrumental to instrumental music, which was huge for a long time. If my family's listening, I'm just going to apologize for this comment now, but for a long time, my family thought I was going to hell.
Oh gosh.
So there was emotional things we had to overcome, and just learning to play, and work with the band and all that kind of good stuff was also a thing. But I think that's kind of what I'm trying to get at here, is that we really had to build something that is still pretty young. When I think back to when I started, 30 years ago, obviously Planning Center didn't exist. Pro Presenter didn't exist. I remember when we first started using PowerPoint to do lyrics, so we've kind of gone through multiple iterations of just putting lyrics out for, we had Easy Worship there for a while, right. And I think Media Shout, yes. They allowed you to do video. That was the thing about Media Shout, right? Like you got to do video on your screen and backgrounds. And so, yeah. So, we're handing
in a church. Did you ever serve in a church that did multiple styles?
Yes. So the church I'm in now, actually, first of all, the church I'm in now, this is my second go round with them. So I left for a while and came back. But they're a 120-year-old church.
Wow.
So when I first started, we did a traditional style service and what we called a blended style service. And the blended was, we were singing, we were doing Shout to the Lord and, songs like that. I mean, Hillsong was just kind of coming on the scene. He has made me glad, those types of things. And so, but then we kind of migrated to where both services were blended. Yeah. And now through several, versions later, we are now doing all modern services and trying to find how we can get hymns back in. So but yes, to answer your question, that has been the journey of us basically.
Man, the first church I served in, we were blended. And then
I love that term.
Right. I know. It sort of means you make everyone mad. Like no one's happy.
Exactly.
So we went to visit this church that was kind of mentoring us. They were further along than we were, and they had a contemporary service. So of course we came back and our pastor was like, we have to start a contemporary service. So we did 2 blendeds and 1 contemporary on Sunday morning. And he was super passionate about so I was coat and tie back then.
Yeah.
And in the second service, I would lead worship in the coat and tie. He wanted me to go to my office and change clothes and come in and close out the second service, which was blended, in jeans as a promo for the contemporary service that was going to happen next. And so I remember back then, Willow Creek put out this super thick book of, I don't remember what it was called, but it was like themed services. And, they were like the flagship.
Yeah.
Like, none of us are doing outreach. Willow's the only one doing outreach. So it was like, if your service is about friendship, here's a worship set. Here are movie clips. Here are, drama sketches. Guys, we weren't always doing video. We were doing live drama.
We had drama teams.
Oh man. Yeah. It was wild.
That's crazy. What do you love about kind of where we've landed in this era? As we've kind of seen things evolve and develop, what are you just loving about where we are right now?
I love that we have, it feels like the tools and resources are finally catching up with the responsibilities. And so like, again, I can't say enough about how Planning Center has revolutionized even just I can remember you said that was back in the binder and those transparent insert days, like having to drive around every week with those binders and a CD that I would figure out how to play of the songs. And then there'd be a note, okay, on the CD, it's in the key of A, but I can't sing it in the key of A. So we're going to do it in F. And I apologize that the chart isn't in F, but it's the only chart I have. And so I love that the resources have kind of caught up with that. It makes scheduling easier. It makes communication and connecting, sharing files with our teams so much easier. I think that I think the great thing about that is it frees us up to really focus on the pastoral part of what we're called to do. And that is something that if you're just starting out, you may not see that coming, but you're on a platform, you're in charge of leading people, and it's only a matter of time before somebody comes to you with a need, a crisis, loss, divorce, all manner of stuff. It's only a matter of time till somebody on your team comes to you and asks you for help, asks you to walk with them, or maybe it's not a crisis. They just want you to disciple them or mentor them in their faith. Hopefully we can use this technology to free us up to do more of that, because I do not think we have crushed it when it comes to preparing the next generation both on both the spiritual side and the practical side. I think, guys like you and, that certainly we're trying to do some of this as well. It's, we get this DM every week. Hey, my pastor found out I played guitar and he put me in charge of worship. What should I do? Where do I start? And it just breaks my heart because I'm like, oh man, like I was ill prepared when I stepped in, but thank God he surrounded me with people who could walk with me and, mentors who could help me develop a philosophy of worship and a philosophy of ministry and all the kinds of things that you really need as a foundation. We don't even talk about the word calling that much, but calling is a really important piece of what we do, so I think it excites me that resources are catching up, and hopefully, if you're listening to this, I hope you're getting spiritual resources as well as practical resources, because you're gonna live in both worlds. And if you think they're gonna give you this huge office and you're gonna sit in there and listen to elevation worship all day, I have news for you. That is not it, man.
Yeah. And I think that was the challenge of our generation, right? Like, I think we were given the task to do this thing that nobody really understood how to do. So, it took hours to pick songs, sort out the parts, write the charts, make the binders, get the rehearsals together. And so much of our time was really taken up by the logistics of just preparing to lead a Sunday morning.
Absolutely. Yep.
And then somebody on your team has a divorce or a miscarriage or loses a job. And now you have to carve out time out of your already packed schedule to minister to people. And to affirm what you're saying, the resources have become such now, we can actually probably spend more time in this era pastoring people. And this is a big thing that I'm really working on with some of the young worship leaders. In fact, I had a meeting today about this very thing that, there are two words in our title, it's either worship pastor or worship leader. And we could do the worship part probably because we've been gifted musically in some way. And we tend to kind of that's how the church kind of views our responsibility. It's the leadership part that I think carries as much weight as standing on the platform and leading worship. Absolutely. So we're actually working on a resource right now, helping people understand how we do that second part. How do we not just steward the songs of the church, but how do we steward the people of the church, as the people who help lead the songs of the church? And so, yeah, I would agree with that. I feel like I have more time now to steward and pastor and lead people than I've ever had in ministry. Which I think is great timing, right? As we're kind of coming to the end of our season on our platforms, it's like, okay, how do we carve out this time to make sure this next person or these next people are ready to lead in our place? So yeah, absolutely. That's really good. What are some of the things that, like, if you could go back and fix them, if you could, the unintended consequences, like if you could go back in time and redo things, what are some of the things that you would do differently? You wish would have turned out differently in the church, maybe?
I wish I had, been able to fast track the organizational side, because just like you got to carve out time to pastor, like so I started in a church, it was 1,100 or whatever. So it's a sizable, especially for then, high demand musical program, special services. We kind of called them, what do we call them? Not cantatas, but we do a huge Christmas thing. We do a huge Easter thing, Good Friday, Maundy, Thursday, all that. And so I wish I had been able to fast track the organizational side, because I was in a church, 3 weekend services, and I would spend, maybe, let's be generous and say I'll spend 2 hours this week leading worship. I'll spend 60 hours pastoring, managing, planning, like worship and production ministries are ministries of details. And they are, aside from the message, they are the ministries that the entire body sees every single week. And you learn very, very quickly if you have shortcutted any details, because they will let you know. Your team will let you know, or the people in the seats will let you know. And so I think I eventually, my wife very graciously came alongside me, and I was a little bit of a fly by the seat of my pants guy back then. And she was the structure in our relationship for sure. And she came to me. I remember her coming to me like a month before Christmas Eve. It was my first Christmas Eve service. I'd never even attended a Christmas Eve service. Growing up, my mom always wanted to go. And every year she had this plan. We're going this year. And we would talk her out of it every year, because we were that family in our church. We were there every time the doors were open. So we're like, it's Christmas Eve. Can we not just stay home and open presents tonight? So my wife comes up to me and she was like, so what are you planning for Christmas Eve? I was like, Kim, I haven't even thought about it. I have no idea. And she goes, Christmas Eve's a really, really big deal. You're going to want to spend a little time thinking about that. I'm like, you're kidding me. People are going to leave their families and come to church on Christmas Eve. And so thankfully I had people like my wife. I had my ordination process. There was one of the requirements was a 3-year mentoring relationship with an ordained clergy from our denomination. And so I spent 3 years, and it ended up turning into, like 10 years, because it was so valuable to me, and we had such a great connection. So, they were very graciously came alongside me and helped me on the things that I was not gifted in, which were details, man, details,
right.
And details.
Do you think worship leaders in general are detailed people?
I think it's really hard. Not often this would be a question for God. Why would you not make creative people more detailed?
But see, I would argue that we are incredibly detailed, just not at the details that matter to people who aren't
probably
musicians and creatives, So for us, the reason we're spending all of our time putting these binders together, making sure people know the keys we're in and the transposing and, all that kind of good stuff, is because those details are important. But we don't sit in the pews and in the spaces of the people who are worshiping with us, and we miss the details that are important to them. But yeah, I always felt that space really hard to navigate as well. It's like, how do we find those details that are so important to everybody else when we are occupying ourselves with the details that are incredibly important to us? So I've never really explored that with anybody else. It's just a thought I've had and wondered what do you think about that? So
I think those are great points. I would also probably be a little more appropriately aggressive with church leadership in terms of creating some space. Like if you're just starting out and you're in a church where it's your responsibility to be on the platform every single weekend, I think that's maybe an unrealistic expectation. What you need to be is with some sort of regularity, you need to have the freedom to visit another church, visit the church down the road, find a church that's smaller than yours, experience worship there, find a church that's bigger than yours, experience worship there. I think conferences are great. But I've learned as much by just visiting another church or asking the worship pastor at the giant church down the street, can I take you to lunch and maybe spend an hour or two, just walk in your area, kind of walk me through your systems. I mean, I think I would be a little more appropriately aggressive in trying to clear that kind of space for myself, just to let me get out and learn some practical, like boots on the ground type things what you might find is that, hey, we're not doing that bad. We've got some things together. Or you might find out, wow, I never even considered that. Like that's a way to organize teams that I didn't think of, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel,
Yeah.
If you want to be a good runner, find somebody who's a better runner than you are and run with them. It's the same.
That thing that we learn in youth ministry, when we're kids, that the 5 people you surround yourself with will be, the culmination of who you are the older I get, the more true I realize that is, and it impacts every part of your life. And one of the things I'm super blessed with is I actually have 4 other worship leaders here in the same town I live in that work at completely different churches. And we meet about once a month for coffee, and we share all of our prayer concerns, and we talk about, how we organize our music and how we play in our planning center. And we talk about life and kids and all those kinds of things. And I can say, to affirm what you're saying, spending time with other worship leaders, watching
Absolutely.
what they do. I mean, we have the advantage of watching their live streams now. So my Sunday afternoons are, not just verifying that my team did their job, but I spend time watching my friends' worship services,
Absolutely.
and I would say this, not just to the young worship leader, go find other people, to the older worship leaders, make yourself available.
Absolutely.
I can say when I was a young worship leader, it was incredibly difficult to find an older worship leader that would just sit down and let me ask them questions. And the resource they could have been in an era where there were no resources, to me, I would agree, would have completely fast tracked my ability to organize and get things together, and those types of things. So I think that's a really great point. Talk about your ministry, what you do, and how people can connect with you.
So the Instagram is kind of the hub that drives what we do, and you can find us there at Worship Probs. We're also Worship Probs on Facebook and YouTube and Threads and all that kind of stuff. Our name used to be Worship Leader Probs, and that's a different podcast.
That's a whole other podcast.
But we are still Worship Leader Probs on TikTok. So you can find us there. And we have the Worship Probs podcast, and we do another podcast where we get in a car and we wire it with cameras and mics, and we pick up worship leaders and we sing old worship songs that really moved us back when we were getting to know the Lord and just starting in worship. And that's called Worship Karaoke. You can find that on our Instagram and YouTube.
That Tesla's pretty sweet too, by the way. Yeah.
It's pretty sweet. That's my partner's. I wish that was
mine. That's awesome, man. Well, I know you're blessing a lot of us, beyond just the podcast. I know the information that you're sharing and all of that has been incredibly useful to so many of us out there that you don't get to meet. So thank you for what you do. And my goal here is to connect people to people like you. So I'm just really glad and thankful for your ministry and the way you are encouraging the next generation, man. Thank you for joining us today.
That's very kind. I appreciate it. And I'm cheering you on, man. So if there's ever anything I can do, let me know.